Good morning, everyone. We're going to give this just a minute or two for everyone from the that's on the group to get transferred over to the page, to the Featherweight Shop page. If we posted this on the group, you wouldn't be able to share it and everything later because it's a private group. But if we have it on the page, you'll be able to share it and see it later and everything. So
we have people commenting already.
Oh, we got
Connie from Minnesota.
Commenters already. Christian is doing a little technical stuff here so that we can see our questions and such that you might have. You'll notice that, well, a couple things. It's extremely quiet in the shop today.
Yep.
And there's a reason for that. Last night, later in the day or whatever, our governor added us to the list of 20 states or so far that are under a, what do you call it? Stay-at-home order, work from home, something like that. So anyway, all the employees are gone. It's just us. We're fortunate in that.
He can't hear you. Just that the volume is turned up or something.
Volume issues. Yeah, we've done our all the tests, so it might need to be individual computer volume. Anyone else hear us? Go ahead and
if you can comment, that'd be
comment great. Or something if you can hear. Not sure why. I know bandwidths are
Sarah.
Okay, and Jamelyn says she can hear fine, so maybe crank your volume up. I know we're suffering from low bandwidth all across the country, probably the world, really. So anyway, yeah, so it's us here. We're fortunate in that the Featherweight Shop is next door to where we live, and so the stay-at-home order doesn't quite affect us. And but yesterday when that came in, basically all the employees packed up stuff to take home and to work on at home. And so the techs took machines home. One of the techs took all the motor rewinding stuff home, so we'll get a bunch of motors rewound. And but yeah, that's the reason Burrell's not here. Burrell runs our tech department, and he also took machines home to work on and such. So if you happen to have sent foot controllers or anything like that into the shop to be serviced, we'll get to those just as soon as we can. But I didn't want customer stuff sent home and be scattered everywhere. So anyway, so there, we'll get to those foot controllers and motor rewinds and stuff as soon as we can. Fortunately, we're all healthy here right now, and our employees, Lou and Roxanne, who many of you know, which are our customer service grandmas, and they
we call them the GGs.
We call them the GGs, the great grandmas. They already took their computers, and we forwarded the phones and everything to them, so they've already been working remotely.
They're probably watching this.
They're probably watching. Hi, Lou and Roxanne. So they're still going to be able to answer your questions, give order updates and things like that. But you get the unique experience, because I'm going to be real honest with you. It's been a while since I've tied rickrack on a package. The girls in the shipping department have been doing that for quite some time. So now, for the next few, well, supposedly we're on a 21-day stay at home. So for the next 21 days, because the mail, I talked to the postmaster and they're still picking up mail. So you're going to get packages packed by the Henrys, and I'm not sure if we're I'm not sure if we're as fast as the gals in the shipping department.
We're not.
We're not.
We're not.
But we've got this little stamp here that says "Lovingly wrapped with Rick Rack, just for you" by April, and so you might even see some of those from Carmen in the coming days. So we are still able to send packages out, and right now our supply line is generally okay. So, but yeah, we're where we live in the third least densely populated county in the United States. Mm-hmm. We have less than or right at 1 person per square mile. And to put that in perspective, I believe New York City has 30,000 people per square mile. So there's not a whole lot of people around us. And so that kind of helps with the, what's it called? Social distancing?
Yeah, that's social SEW.
Oh, social,
yes.
SEW. Social distancing, yes.
Or isolated.
We are isolated. There we go.
ISEW.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah. So we are fortunate in that respect, and most of the staff here at the Featherweight shop were able to take stuff home to work on and keep things going from that end. And one way or another, we're gonna all make it through this. So. But Christian and I decided that we would have our virtual fireplace out here and have a little fireside chat, answer Featherweight questions. Just spend a little time together, because that's what a lot of us are
not able to do.
Yeah, not able to do, and normal routines are quite different. So April, do we have any actual questions yet?
Not yet. People are just
people are just
say hello.
Popping in to say
now,
hello.
I do recognize some names. There's Cindy Willoughby. She was on the cruise with us last year.
Yes, so Cindy was on the cruise. I've seen names
we
that
saw Sarah a couple
we've
times.
had in classes and such in
Cheryl Hughes. I
in the
see
past. So Burl runs our tech department. As I mentioned, he's been the brains behind motor rewinding. Christian is our historian who has amassed a great amount of singer memorabilia. He just loves to collect that stuff and knows what would you say, just the timeline of the Featherweight. He's the one that created the timeline that is on our website. A couple of the gals that are watching from home right now are going to link different things. So if you haven't seen that timeline, Jamie or Ashley or someone will link that, put it on there so you can see that. But yeah, that's kind of what Christian does. So when we teach classes, Christian is usually the one that does all the historical information. And as far as classes, we right now on the schedule we have Missouri Star. We have 3 retreats in August in Missouri Star. That's as far as we know, everything is still on go with Missouri Star. I don't know if you were watching any of Missouri Star's. What did they call it? Their not grand prize. What did they call it? Golden Star, maybe?
Okay, we're getting some questions.
Yes.
Golden Star. Okay, we're getting questions. Okay, so I'll make this quick. So anyway, yeah. So Missouri Star. They did their Golden Star giveaway thing, and we donated a featherweight and a bunch of goodies, and so they gave that away. And I know a lot of people were putting in their tickets to try to win those things. So that was fun. Okay, what kind of question we got, Christian?
Well, go ahead. Does he have it?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. It's Tamar, and she's wanting to know, and you might need to repeat this because I'm not.
Okay, Tamar is wondering
if we keep a personal collection of badged featherweights.
If we keep a personal collection of badged rare featherweights.
Yes.
Yes, we do. We do have a Texas Centennial, a Chicago, 1939 Golden Gate, Wrinkle, and Blackside featherweights here at the shop. In our collection.
Yeah.
If you stop by the shop, if you come to the shop, maybe after the next 21 days, then you can see our collection of rare featherweights.
Yes, and the neat thing, because over the years we've had a couple, because we've been doing this since the kids were little, and when the kids are little and you've got diapers to buy and braces to pay for and things like that, you don't often invest in collectible machines. And so we've had a lot of nice machines come and go over the years, but when did Sharon pass away? Was that 2017, April?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah,
because
we were in
2017 or 2018.
Yeah, so many of you know and have watched Dave McCallum's DVD and his accompanying book on the featherweight, and they are really good friends of ours, and they actually went with us to Missouri Star. They came out of retirement and went to Missouri Star with us and helped teach that first retreat back there. And anyway,
it's on the blog. We have a blog on it.
Oh, we have a blog post on it.
Yeah.
A little while after that retreat, Sharon passed away, and she was a Texas girl, and she had a really beautiful Texas in her collection. And eventually, Dave, who quilts, said, "I just want to keep a couple machines for quilting." And so the Texas that we have in our collection is from Sharon, and so it's kind of a special one to me because they were kind of like, I guess you would say, pseudo grandparents to Christian and Ruth, and so that's a fun one. It's in the entryway along with a lot of other fun stuff.
So we've got questions up here, and then so what do you have?
Okay, so the next one I have is what does it mean? What does winding the motor mean?
Good question. So featherweight motors have like all little electric motors, and I don't know if you can see that at all. But anyway, this is the armature of the inside of a featherweight motor, and it has been rewound. And by rewound, I mean there's these. I mean they're like hair thickness copper wires, and hundreds, actually maybe even more than 1,000 feet of that wiring that's on here. And this is what makes the motor go. And this is one of the reasons we created the So Retro grease, because as the wrong type of grease or oils were put in the motor, it gets on these wires, it melts the insulation on these wires, and it fuses together, basically shorting the circuit. If Burl was here, he could tell you in more technical terms. And then the motor goes slower, and then the slower it goes, the hotter it gets, and the hotter it gets, the more insulation that it melts, and it eventually fries the motor. And if you've got a motor that has smoke coming out of it, it's because somebody's put in oil, and that's what's happening. It's getting on here and it's fried. So anyway, Burl, who has an amazing mind, because we've been trying to have motors rewound forever, and so as we went across the country in 2016 teaching classes, I would stop in like alternator and starter shops and things like that rewind motors, and they would all say, "Oh yeah, we totally could do that." But then when you send them this little tiny thing, they'd say, "No, the wires are too fine. We can't do that." And so anyway, Burl basically reverse engineered the wiring to a featherweight motor. There's about 27 different winding patterns for a featherweight motor, and so you've got this part, the armature, and then the two coils that are inside the motor, they rewind as well, and the amount of wire here has to correspond mathematically to the right amount of wire here. It's way over my head, but Burl and the gals, one of the gals and a couple of the guys in the tech department all rewind motors for us. We've never made an official tutorial. We will, but the truth is it's so labor intensive to do this process that we just can't turn out hundreds and hundreds. We don't have the staff to do that, but it's pretty fascinating. Some, like April, get the benefit of having this done because you basically get a brand new or in April's case, a hot rod motor. Burl, who understands the mathematics of this, he rewound her motor. It has about the same output as like a Singer 201 on her Featherweight. It's one of those that really could get up and walk off the table. So anyway, that's rewinding a motor. Eventually we'll do a tutorial on that. You can send your motor in, have it rewound, and have a strong one. It's one of the things that I'm really most proud of, because it's one of the things that will keep featherweights going for years and years. Because as motors die, electric motors can't last forever. And so to keep featherweights going for years and years, it's important that we have the ability to have these rewound. So kind of cool.
What do we got next?
Okay, Sarah has joined our conversation again.
Yes.
And she asked, I noticed on the site the other day you sell paint for the tan featherweight. We also sell it for the white.
Tan and white. Touch-up paint.
Does that match all tans? She has a tan with a few chips.
No, the tans and the white both have a slight, I don't know if it's pigment fade or whatever over time,
it could be, yeah.
But it's not perfect. You're going to get some that's going to match up totally.
And we have that disclaimer in the description on both of them.
Yeah.
It
it's
has
definitely
been paint matched to a tan featherweight.
Yes, it has been professionally matched, and it is automotive paint, the type that you would put on there. And for some it works perfect, but there's enough variation, and it's definitely better. It's better on all of them than just a big old chip or something there. But it may not be perfect.
Especially if it's just a little spot like on the back of a motor, that little touch-up paint's going to be perfect.
Right.
Just to cover up, because the contrast of having a dark machine with a light colored paint makes the dark stand out more.
Yes, exactly. And both the white and the tan do not have a clear coat over them, and so they're much more prone to chips like that.
Okay, next question. How often should the machine be oiled and greased? And I know we addressed this on the website on several tutorials, but this person says that she's getting conflicting opinions, so I thought you could weigh in.
Oh, conflicting opinions, yeah.
So there are sort of 3 different intervals with oiling and greasing the featherweight. The gears and any part that rocks, like most of the parts that involve the presser bar lifter are rocking back and forth, and not every single time either. Also the parts that involve the feed dogs underneath, those ones are mainly just rocking back and forth. So a part that rocks, or the gears, get oiled every 6 months.
Well, the gears get greased every 6
months. The
months.
gears get greased, but yes, every 6 months. And then anything that's going up and down constantly or spinning constantly, like the needle bar or the shafts underneath, those should be oiled every 8 hours. And then the other one is the hook assembly.
Every 8 hours of sewing.
Every 8 hours of sewing.
Actual use.
Yes, every 8 hours of use. And then the hook assembly should get oiled every time you sit down to sew or every time you change a bobbin. That one is just metal on metal. There's no bushings there. So that one needs to be oiled quite frequently.
And when you have a machine where that hook assembly has not been oiled, because it'll still run, but it's wearing, and when it wears like that, it wears it down. So then later it's going to be loose. You're going to get more rattling and everything like that. So it's important to do that, even though it'll run without doing that. It's the recommended maintenance interval. Okay. And is somebody linking to any of those tutorials? Because we have a, what's it called, like a diagram?
Yes, there's a diagram. It's on the oiling page.
On the oiling page,
on the Featherweight Schoolhouse, under maintenance and tutorials, they'll find all those.
On the Featherweight Schoolhouse, under maintenance and tutorials is where that diagram is.
Yeah.
Okay, and next question, probably more for Christian. Do you have any other featherweights or any other machines besides the featherweight?
Do we have any other machines besides the featherweight?
Do you mean like the Bernina with all the dust on it up at the house that April never uses?
I use it for when I applique.
Okay, when she's doing applique, she does use her Bernina, and she has an Elna and stuff. And then we have a few others around. Christian does have a Chicago badged
Singer 15.
Singer 15.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 99 in the back. My mom had a 15.
Yeah, we have personal ones from family, and such?
Mainly one of the standard other machines, like a 15. We have one, a 99, a 201, a 66,
A 401.
401, a 301, but we don't have a lot of them.
Yeah.
Mainly just for reference, if somebody had a question that was specific to one of those machines.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, next question. Remind me the type of spool wound that the Featherweight likes.
What type of spool winding? Is that what they're wondering?
I think
Does the
maybe the
Featherweight
type
like?
of maybe the type of thread.
The
Spool,
type of thread?
Like you've got the orifill there.
Sure. Originally, the Featherweight was used with a stack wound spool of thread where each layer of thread was just wound right on top of the other. So that worked great, but
little tiny ones.
right, little threads, but now the high quality thread is the brands like Orifil, Presencia, the ones that are cross wound. So this wasn't the original type of thread, original winding of thread that was used on the Featherweight, but it is the high quality thread now, but that doesn't mean that we can't use it on the Featherweight. Attachments like the thread post allow us to use the high quality thread on the Featherweight. With the bobbin tension meter, you can make sure that you have the right tension adjustment, because a lot of whether or not a Featherweight's going to like a certain thread depends on tension.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, next question. They're asking about the needle winding up and down when they wind a bobbin. We have a tutorial on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When the needle goes up and down, when you try to wind a bobbin, we do have a tutorial. Ashley or Jamie can link that. It has to do everything with your hand wheel here.
The first thing I always try is just put the foot down. That adds some extra resistance on top of those feed dogs, so the machine is less likely to go. It doesn't always fix it. Sometimes it takes more than that, but usually that does it.
If it's been worn a lot in the hand wheel bushing to where this is kind of, when the belt pulls on it, it turns a little bit, it causes some friction. Mm-hmm. And there's some really old machines that it's just hard to get it to stop going up and down. But like Christian said, dropping the presser foot is kind of locking this part back in place, and that usually that little additional resistance will stop that from happening. If it does it anyway, and it does it like it's trying to actually sew, not just occasionally bouncing up and down, then you've got something assembled wrong here in the hand wheel, and we do have the tutorial on that.
Okay, we have a good question.
Mm-hmm.
It says, let me know if I'm doing something wrong when winding bobbins.
Okay.
But it seems every one of them has a different tension.
Okay.
He does do the test with the tension tool from the Featherweight shop. So
Okay.
I don't know if he's referring to the tension like actually on the bobbin. You know how it's wound?
Mm-hmm.
You know how sometimes it can be really...
It sounds like he's talking about when it's in the bobbin case.
Okay.
The question was, why do basically the same different bobbins but wound on the same machine come out as a different tension when they're put in the bobbin case?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Well, a couple things. For starters, you want to make sure that you always have your bobbin in the bobbin case so that it's spinning counterclockwise, because if it doesn't go up and then out the spring, it doesn't have the same amount of tension on it. Consistency of always using the same bobbin. If you've got a variety of old bobbins, you're going to get some difference in how they're spinning inside the bobbin case.
If you have the same bobbins, it could be how tight the thread is actually wound on the bobbin.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there is an adjustment that can make it a little bit more consistent. This bobbin winder tension unit, the screw that holds it onto the machine, you can loosen that, slide it back and forth. That'll make sure that you're getting the thread going back and forth evenly on each bobbin. So
you don't have to use your finger to try to get it over to the left side as
right.
it's winding.
Right. There's a tutorial. Ruthie has one on the Getting to Know Your Featherweights.
Okay.
Okay. If you didn't hear April, Ruthie has a tutorial on that, on getting to know your featherweight. Mm-hmm. So that would be one thing. The other thing is that occasionally, when Christian and I were off at a tech school they were talking about the need to not wind your bobbins at top speed. Try to go at a consistent speed, not necessarily top speed, because you start getting jumping and such with the spool that it's coming off of. That's another thing why the thread post or a thread stand helps to get consistency there. Another thing, somebody gave us this tip years ago about where they were having problems with the thread wanting to jump out of that top thread guide when you're winding a bobbin. And so you can actually, when winding a bobbin, run it through your take-up lever, because it can't jump out of that because it's going through a hole. So that's another thing to help in the consistency of winding a bobbin.
Okay, next question. And it could be, I have to look at the video to double check this one, but she says, I'm not sure on where to oil near the bobbin, on the chrome toothed disc or under it. You know, that is kind of hard to see on that bobbin case base. So
yeah,
she's wondering where that drop of oil goes on the hook assembly. That one that gets oiled every time you sit down to sew or every time you change the bobbin.
You might be able to see it on that 222 better.
Well,
right behind you.
Okay. The best way that I found is you do it with the bobbin case out, and if you turn the hand wheel with your needle plate on, you can see the part that is spinning and the part that is staying in the same spot. So if Dad turns the hand wheel, most of the hook assembly, or the base here in the center, stays put because it's anchored through the needle plate, and the rest of the hook assembly is spinning. So right where they're spinning, where it's going around, where the base is going around inside the hook assembly, that's where that drop of oil
Just that drop of oil. So where metal is rubbing on metal. So when you look at it like this, you can see that one part's staying put and the other part is spinning. It's where the two meet up. And sewing machine oil flows really well to the point of resistance, and so there's not an exact spot there. It's just someplace where you're going to get friction from those two parts rubbing.
Okay, next question. Let's see here. I just read it. It says, oh, I was cleaning my Featherweight for the first time and was a tad concerned about the covering of the wires on the inside. It looks pretty old, obviously. How do I know if it's safe?
She's concerned about the safety of the wiring on the inside. It's still covered, but it looks really old.
Yeah, so April probably told us this question just because she's been begging me to do a tutorial on this, because we get so many questions on this. And so I don't know, yes, that tutorial is coming. But this machine has been cleaned on the bottom side. So it has cloth wiring, a cloth covering on these wires. And if it looks like it's fraying in there, it's just where the cloth comes up to the end where it meets the eyelet. It's not actually fraying, or it's not the wire itself that is causing a problem. And then this piece right here is this lead sheath that is around the wires that go up to the light. Now this one right here happens to be clean, but that's because it's been cleaned here in the shop. Normally, what's it called? Oxidation on that lead tube occurs, and so it gets this white powdery stuff. And if you haven't been inside that machine in decades, it can get a lot of there, especially depending on different humidity and different climates. And when it starts flaking off there, that's when you've got problems, because those flakes will get into these gears, and they can actually slow the machine down. So one of the things we do is we recommend that you clean this. We clean it with, we've got a gear and a lint cleaning brush. So we put the machine on like some cardboard or something to absorb that kerosene, and we coat that, wear some protective gear, for your eyes and breathing and stuff, and then get that stuff off there. And then after that, I always put something I learned from my dad. He would coat the terminals on the battery of the car in, because they're lead, in grease. And so you can just take a little of the So Retro grease and wipe that down. And if you stay on top of it, by stay on top I mean every few years you look at it, you're not going to get that flaky white stuff returning. But the wires inside are fine. That's not usually an issue.
Okay, next question says, where did I see it? My husband over-oiled and probably greased my machine. What do I do now?
Over-oiled the machine, probably over-greased it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Though, I mean, it can make a mess on your fabric, or it could drip through onto your table or anything like that, but you haven't done any damage to the machine at all. And actually, the only time that you would ever do damage is if you dumped a bunch of oil into the motor, which the motor only gets grease, as we mentioned earlier. So you could do your best with, you know, some paper towel or whatever, but probably the thing I would do would be to open it up and you know, put it on a towel and run it, and you know, get that grease, you know, because that's the same thing when you oil your hook assembly every day. You want to, you know, run a foot, you know, of stitches out onto a piece of scrap fabric or something, just to get that oil soaked up the excess. So good news is you haven't done any damage.
Okay, two fun questions. Did you make the grandmother's flower garden quilt behind you?
Did we make the quilt behind us?
I did.
You did not. You bought it at the
I bought it.
at the
bought it.
Quilt Guild show.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the next question is, where's Ruthie today?
Where's Ruthie?
Ruthie, poor little Ruthie, has to do school.
Online.
Yeah, Ruthie is homeschooled, and up until she got into high school, that was, April did that with her. But now her classes are a little more advanced than what we can challenge her with or whatever. So she actually does homeschooling online, live with a teacher, and which she loves because it's one of these deals where she wears a headset and she gets to interact with all the other students. But they're going through, what is it now? It's not War and Peace, but what is she going through? Some book that I've read in college, and I'm like, it's just mind-boggling. But yeah, that's why Ruthie's not here, is she's doing school. She is looking forward to, I think she's done with school around 2 o'clock, and she's going to come down and help us do packages for today.
No. Okay, let's see if I can. Is there a way to mark my bobbin case without damage to prevent theft?
The question is there a way to mark the featherweight bobbin case without damaging it to prevent theft? You could
I've seen
change the color of the bobbin case. Like you could get a bluing, like a gun bluing dye, and you could dye the bobbin case. If you had engraved it with something, each time the featherweight makes a stitch, the thread wraps around the front of the bobbin case.
Slides over it.
It slides over, so if there was anything that could fray the thread, or in worst case break the thread, that wouldn't be good. But dyeing the bobbin case would probably be fine, especially just
it would work. You know, if you went to sell it later, somebody probably wouldn't like that. Now, what I have seen people do is put a dot of like fingernail polish on it, and that works because you can get it back off later. But the other thing is, you know, sometimes bobbin cases disappear at retreats and stuff like that, and it doesn't happen to necessarily be theft. It can just be, it's time to leave and everybody's got their stuff spread out, and you know, it gets picked up with some fabric scraps, or they all look the same. And so, you know, you could be sitting there 6 months later and say, how did I end up with 2 bobbin cases? I have no idea how this happened. Maybe I've always had it. Well, so anyway, that's something you could do. We really, one of the things, you know, David Werther mentioned this the other day about our new bobbin case, that he was so thankful that we had a new bobbin case, because many of you know we just came out with the new reproduction bobbin case that we guarantee to work, and finally there's a reproduction bobbin case that is good. But what he was saying was, hopefully people will stop cannibalizing featherweights and 301s just for the bobbin case now, because it's pretty common to find, you know, a machine that's missing its bobbin case, and it's got to come from somewhere. And so anyway, so just another thing about that hopefully the theft or whatever on bobbin cases will go down now that there's a good replacement.
Yeah, that is good. That's good thinking. Okay, if the motor gets warm or hot, is it still okay to use it after it cools down? And then there was a similar question of, how do you know when your motor needs rewound?
How do you know when your motor needs rewound? Well, let's deal with the first one about the warm or hot. Warm, it's so hard because what might feel warm to me might feel hot to you. But it's an electric motor, so it's gonna have heat to it. There's just no way around that. That's why the So Retro grease, the way that's worked, and we've got tutorials and everything for you to see, but it works by a certain amount of heat, starting to make this lubricant soft to where it will flow and it'll keep the motor lubricated. But even lubricated, it's going to get some heat. That's just how it's meant to work. One of the things that we've found here recently is the wrong type of lubricant put inside the motor quits getting lubricated. So the friction level goes up, and as the friction level goes up, the heat goes up. And then as the heat goes up, you start melting the wiring on the insulation on the armature, and then that's when you start getting motor failure. So it's important that you put the right grease in there, specifically for that purpose. We've had the Featherweight, the So Retro grease has been out for
2015.
2015, so it's been out about 5 years. And we basically designed it for that reason, as we were starting to see all these problems, and there was no longer the low melting point grease available on the market. When I say we designed it, I had one of the oldest lubricant manufacturers in the country. It is USA manufactured. They were the ones in their lab that actually matched as close as possible the original Singer grease. And that's what So Retro.
They would send it away to do testing.
Oh my word! It took a couple of years of testing back and forth to get the right consistency with the right melting point and things like that. So typically new motors don't use a melting point grease. They have hermetically sealed bearings and such, and so grease like this became a thing of the past. Even Singer didn't carry a low melting point grease anymore. What was the other question?
When should the motor be rewound?
Yeah.
When do you know it should be rewound?
Well, there's a short and a long answer. The short answer would be to call the shop and have a tech walk you through what your machine is doing. Because there's so many things that when a machine slows down, you think, I've got motor problems. But there's so many other issues that it can be. So we have a process that we go through. First, taking off the needle plate to make sure that there's nothing causing resistance in the hook assembly. And then we take off the belt and we see how the hand wheel feels. These are all things that I go through in our classes that we teach. So if you've got a machine that just, you take the belt off it and you take the needle plate off there and you spin it and it just smooth as butter and it's just fast and everything, well, then we know that the machine's not the problem, so that if it's going slow, then most likely it is the motor. But a lot of times people think, oh, my motor's really shot, and it's something as simple as the belt being too tight or thread caught back here or something that's bogging things down.
And when you send us the motor, we start with seeing if just a service can take care of it. Sometimes the service is all it takes to get the motor working fast again.
Right.
If that
Or
can't
new
take
motor
care of it.
brushes or something.
And by
Yeah.
service, Christian's talking about things like new motor brushes. They take the armature and they polish the commutator on it. They even, in our machine shop, they'll even mill this correctly.
new
wicks, everything like that. One of the things that we found that was really interesting that Burrow found that's helped also with the speed of these motors is they weren't balanced very well from Singer out of the factory. When you put them on a balancing wheel, they're often out of balance, and so they balance each one of these when it comes out, so it's smoother running, I guess you would say.
So there's been several questions, and I just have kind of been skipping over, but there's a lot of them, and you mentioned it when you talked about in our classes. Where and when are you going to teach classes?
Yeah, good question. And I wish I had the answer that we were loading up a motorhome and hitting the road. When we went on the road in 2016, we were on the road for 77 nights, taught well over 500 of you around the country. And we absolutely loved it, and it was a great time for our family. And at that time, we had two young ladies here at home. The business was actually in our home at that time, that got out whatever packages for the day. And April answered emails and such on the road. Since then, things have just gotten a little bit hectic. After the So Retro Grease came out, and then it's with the Super Belt and things like that, you know, quilt stores across the country are starting to carry our products. All the main distributors carry them, and so we've just gotten busy. So the reality is it's hard for me to pack up and go any distance to teach a class because there's 22 or something staff here at the Featherweight shop that I'm responsible for. So we try to do specific events where we plan well ahead for how the shop continues on without the Henrys all here. And those, at this point in time, they've basically been 3 weeks at Missouri Star, and then you know, like last year we did a Lori Holt retreat, and it was only a few hours away from us, and then the cruises. And I know that's not a reality for everyone, and so in the meantime, one of the things I've done is I have finally, after a couple of years, I've convinced one of my best friends, who is a video production manager, to help me with the videos so that we can get more videos out to get your questions answered. Because the deal is, when Christian and I go teach a class, if it's a one-day class, 18 to 20 is about all that we can do and feel like we've done everybody the proper service of education. We can teach a little more when we do a retreat like at Missouri Star. But anyway, this helps get us to more people, in front of more people, because I can teach 18 at once at a local quilt store, or we can teach, you know, Ruthie's got a video that's got over 100,000 views now on, I think, threading the machine. So I could never do that face to face. So anyway.
It looks like we got, is it difficult to take a bobbin case apart? I'm trying to figure out why my tension screw would fall out by itself.
Okay. I didn't see that one on the screen there. You want to answer that?
Yeah, those tension screws on the bobbin case are really small, and the threads are really short. There's only just a couple times around, the threads only go around a couple times, so they don't stay in that well. If they're tight or at a sufficient amount of tightness on them, I mean, it is an adjustable screw, they aren't going to fall out on their own. So you want to make sure it's the right screw in there. You want to make sure that there's nothing underneath the spring itself that can be lifting the spring up and pop that screw out. So those are the first two things I would check.
So we're talking about the screws. This one doesn't have a bobbin case. We're talking about the tension and the holding screw on the side of the bobbin case. So what Christian just mentioned is really key to why some of those are loosening up. And that is two things, either reproduction screws or a reproduction bobbin case. The old reproductions that have been out there that have been such poor quality and cause a lot of damage when they get stuck on your machine. One of the issues that we have tried to overcome here at the Featherweight shop is to manufacture parts for the Featherweight. Because most of the parts that are available for the Featherweight that you find on eBay and such, like screws, they were actually designed for the Alpha So, which was a Featherweight knockoff. And so the threads, the pitch and the thread count and everything is not the same, and it's not right. And so when we got this new bobbin case designed, and of course we used a tried and true company that makes sewing machine parts, and we had to have them start with a new mold and everything. But we wanted the screws to be the right screws for the bobbin case that we were making, but also for the original bobbin cases as well. So when it's an original screw put in there or a correct replacement screw in there like we carry now, shouldn't have that issue of it falling out.
Yeah. Okay, you have a couple of questions. What is the difference between the ideal seam gauge and the seam square?
What's the difference between the ideal seam gauge and the ideal seam square? Mom's given us both of them here.
Oh, I just realized what she was asking.
She was asking between the ideal seam gauge, that purple thing that's long.
We used to carry that. It
Yeah.
has to do with where, because this one is designed for the featherweight with, and Carmen can explain it with the left side of the needle.
Right. We've, and this is another product that took a lot of back and forth designing with the manufacturer, because you can get enough variance with moving the needle when the needle is through the hole on the seam square, the accurate seam square. You've got enough play in there that you can change. If you're trying to get the difference between a scant 1/4 inch and a true 1/4 inch is not that much, and so you can accomplish that just by moving back and forth with your needle. And so we designed this to where if you push it over to the same side, it's accurate, and you can get the when it says a scant, if you push it in and push it over, you're going to get a scant. So that's why we went with that, and it matches your featherweight, and it matches the seam square as well. So we thought we could sell them as a set.
Ruthie has a tutorial on the website too on how that's used.
Yes, Ruthie does have a not an ideal seam, the seam accurate seam square.
Okay, here's a good question. Hello from Montreal, Canada. Any idea why my machine might skip a stitch from time to time?
Any idea why my machine might skip a stitch from time to time? A stitch gets skipped when the thread is either pulled too tight or too loose, or the machine is out of time and the hook assembly is actually not getting the loop at the right time.
Yeah, so the technically what a skipped stitch means is that each time your hook comes around and meets the eye of the needle, the hook goes through the loop that's formed at the eye of the needle, and that's how a stitch is made. So anytime that you get a skipped stitch, it means that that hook, the point of the hook, excuse me, did not go through the loop at the eye of the needle. And now Christian's going to tell you there's a lot of different reasons why that can be happening.
Right. So it could be a problem with the thread path. There could be oil on the tension unit, so the thread, or oil on the thread, so that the thread at some point in time goes through the tension unit a little bit faster. That would skip a stitch.
Remember, we were at Ray White's school several years ago, Christian and I were, and he was telling us about one troubling machine where he was getting this skip stitch, and he'd done everything to try to figure out why that was happening. And what it turned out to be was a drop of oil on the side. You know, a lot of times we just throw our spool in the box, in our case, and it got a drop of oil on there. And so every time that drop of the thread with a drop of oil would go through the tension discs here, it would have less tension, and it would go, and you would get a skip stitch. So that would be one thing. We have a kind of an order of things that we would go through when we get a skip stitch, and the very first thing is always replace your needle.
Yeah, there's so many things that can cause a skip stitch that you need to figure it out sort of scientifically. So don't change two things at once. Take your time to change the needle and see if that takes care of it. Rethread it and see if that takes care of it. Use a different thread spool, not necessarily a different thread, because like I said, most of the time when a featherweight doesn't like the thread, it's because of tension. So you try another spool of thread, try a different bobbin, all in order. Try that and then see if it still skips a stitch.
Yeah,
but there are several different things.
Yeah, make sure your tension on your bobbin case is correct. Also, definitely look for any loose threads that are caught behind your hook assembly. And we do have a pretty good troubleshooting tutorial on that.
Troubleshooting stitch problems.
But unfortunately, that is not one of those things where you just say, oh, well, it's definitely this.
And you can never rule out timing. It can be timing. So.
Okay, here's another good question. What changes need to be made to a British 222K besides the motor and light?
Oh, good question. What changes need to be made to a British 222K or 221K if you get it here in the US to make it compatible, right?
Well, it's if they get a machine with a 220.
A machine with a 220 volt motor, basically. You can use a converter. If you use a converter, then you have 110 power coming into the converter and 220 power coming out of the converter. So you want to make sure you still have a 220 light bulb and you still have a 220 motor. If you want to use the Featherweight without a converter, then you have to change the motor. Since now you have 110 power coming in, you have to change the motor and you have to change the light bulb. You don't have to change the terminal on the back of the machine or the controller. The controller and the terminal work with either voltage. What you likely will need to change is the plug that goes into the wall, only because we have different outlets than they do in Europe and the UK.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that many of the 220 volt machines that came out of the UK still have the capacitors inside the foot controller, and those need taken out and disposed of. Do we have a video or just a regular tutorial?
We have a tutorial on the capacitors. So type in capacitors on the website if you are worried about those or know you have them in your motor, controller, machine.
Yeah, because they should be removed.
Yeah.
Somebody's wanting to know, how do you store your machine when not in use, and should you store it with the presser foot down?
Okay.
So, and kind of in tandem with that, after it's been stored for a long time, do they have to re-oil it and
Okay. How do you store the Featherweight? I have a tutorial on the website that I wrote. Packing up the Featherweight, I think is what it called, and it addresses exactly what we do when you store a Featherweight. You want to put the foot down to take tension off the spring, but so you don't want to leave the foot up.
Yeah. I'll just show you real quick. There are 3 springs that get compressed every time that this gets raised. Okay, you've got a spring inside the tension unit. See, now I've got it raised and the discs are loose. That's because the spring has taken that tension off there. There's a spring inside the presser bar. That's what's giving you the downward pressure right here. And then there's also a little spring on this rocker arm that is pressing on this pin and making that all work. So if you were to leave your machine stored with the presser foot up for a long period of time, you've got 3 springs that are compressed permanently, and they're not meant to do that. On the other hand, if you put a piece of fabric in here and put the foot down, fabric attracts moisture, and you can get rust, especially on your feed dogs, because they're not a polished steel or anything, they're just plain metal. So you don't want to put a piece of fabric under there. And again, I'm talking long term, not like if you're taking it home from a retreat or something like that, but if you're storing it, truly storing it. So what we recommend and what we do with our own machines here is, as Christian was saying, the presser foot in the down position, but the foot off of the machine. When that happens, all of the springs are relaxed now, they're not compressed. You also don't have anything to attract rust here. The other thing is you don't want to put just this down without fabric under there, because then it's putting pressure and it's wearing on your feed dogs, and those feed dogs need to be sharp to advance the fabric. So that's a really good question, and I know there's lots of opinions out there, and that's just my opinion. So that's the science, I guess, behind why I choose to do that. And then again, I would use the same kind of rule of thumb as using your machine. If you had it unused for a year, you've gone beyond that 6-month mark, it's not going to hurt to put some oil on there again.
Mm-hmm. What do we got?
Okay, next question. Let's see. Lou's talking about the thread jam tool, that tutorial is coming later. Okay. As I was checking the motor brushes on my 1947, the cap came out, but left the brush inside the hole. How can I get it out of the hole? I tried turning it upside down and shaking it, but it didn't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She removed the cap on she removed the motor cap to check the brush, and she pulled the spring off, but the actual brush stayed inside that tube.
Mm-hmm.
How can she get it out? She turned the machine upside down, but it's still stuck.
usually carbon dust is what's causing that in there, which, you know, if that happens, then that's a pretty good sign that the brushes needed replaced, or the motor at least needed cleaned out and serviced. You want to do everything you can to get that brush out without taking the motor apart, because whenever you take the motor apart, you know, you got old wires in there, and they can be brittle, and you're flexing them unnecessarily is never a good thing. I have some like little mini tweezers that came out of a Leatherman or whatever that I can actually get a hold of that, pull it out.
So if you can, find some small tweezers.
Yeah. The other thing that I've done and seen done is to take a tiny dot of super glue on the end of like a Q-tip or a matchstick, and stick it in there. Just leave it in there for a few minutes until it adheres to the end of that carbon brush, and then pull it out that way.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What do we got?
Hold on 1 second. Talk about, you already did the screw on the bobbin case. Somebody purchased, they have a white featherweight, and they purchased the spool pin with the washer on the bottom,
Oh yeah.
and
Okay.
that has worked itself loose. Does she just tighten the net tighter, or how does she keep it? Does she have to keep it checking it, or what? Is there any way that she can secure that more?
If there's so a couple things. So pretty common in shipping. Christian has
It's a white
tutorials
featherweight.
on shipping. And one of the things we recommend is to take this off, because you can pack this thing really, really well, and then if the box gets turned over in shipping, this will get either broken off or jammed up through the case or whatever. Unnecessary damage for sure. And so we recommend taking this off. But because of that, over the years, these have been snapped off on a lot of machines. And so we sell replacement entire things, but we also sell a spool pin that has threads, so it goes down through the hole, and then you put a nut on the back side. And this one particularly that she's referring to is a white machine, but it shouldn't matter whether it's white or black. If that nut shouldn't come off, because this isn't actually a moving part, so it probably just wasn't tightened down tight enough. You could also just add a nickel lock washer from a hardware store to it,
Or some
Loctite. Yeah,
I would
Loctite.
add some Loctite, because you don't want to get that down there too far.
Right, yeah. So
Okay.
Loctite would work good.
Next question is, lady has machines from different years,
Okay.
but the belt feels like it has different tension. But
Okay.
they still stitch fine. Is that okay?
She has machines from different years, but the belt
Like it has different.
has different tension.
Like as far as the
Yeah.
Some featherweights do have their original belts. Some have replacement belts from later in their life, and some have replacement belts in the last few years. Belts, we have found original belts that have stretched a little bit. They aren't the same circumference as they used to be, but the motor is adjustable. You can adjust the belt. So if one belt is a tiny bit longer than the other or a tiny bit shorter, there is some adjustment here in the motor. So as long as you're getting a sufficient speed and it's not too tight, then it is fine.
Right.
Even though the belts aren't identical or even not exactly the same length.
Yeah.
I mean, it needs to be very close, but
Right. As long as it's an actual belt for the featherweight, it should be fine. The rule of thumb with the old belts used to be that as loose as possible without slipping on either the hand wheel or the motor pulley. So if you've got one that is fairly tight and it still just runs perfect, that's just a sign that you have a really strong motor. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's in proper adjustment. It's just that your motor overcomes any tightness that you have there.
Right.
The new super belt is way more forgiving on the amount of loose versus tight, because the belts are so soft.
And they grip better.
So
So it could be more loose. Yeah.
Okay, two questions into one.
Two questions.
Somebody asked if there was a tutorial on how to move the needle, and I don't know if it's because when you were talking about the seam square, you said move, but you were meaning move that.
Yeah.
But then there was another question later on about can the featherweight do zigzag, which goes in
How
that question.
to move the needle was one question, and can the featherweight do zigzag? Those
Because on new
questions
machines you can
are
move the
related.
needle.
Right. And the new machine that does the zigzag moves the needle back and forth. The featherweight can do a zigzag, but only with the zigzag attachment. It works really well, but the zigzag attachment moves the fabric back and forth instead of the needle actually doing a stitch back and forth.
Yep.
There isn't an adjustment to move the needle. It's the needle bar is going through the housing of the machine, so there's no adjustment there. And then the needle is in the clamp. It's just one position that it stays in. If you have a different size needle, it's only going to grow on the rounded side.
Right. So the needle here, and I don't know where in my teaching stuff I have the big super needle, and there's a tutorial on that as well. But yeah, the needle has the flat side on it, and the featherweight, the flat side goes to the left. And then the round side is the side where a needle grows. And by grow, I mean when you change from a small, thin needle to a large needle, it's going to grow on just that side and on just the rounded side. And so what can happen is your needle can look perfectly centered in your needle plate, and then you go and you decide you've got to repair some jeans and you put some big thick needle in there, and now all of a sudden it looks like the needle has moved over. The reality is it's only because the needle has grown on the rounded side. The reason that is that way is because when this comes down and meets the hook, remember I was talking about making that loop and forming a stitch, that hook just barely misses the edge of that needle. And so we need that to be consistent no matter what size needle you use. So if you were, if the needle grew all the way around and you put a great big needle in there, all of a sudden you'd be bumping the hook with it. And then likewise, if you put a very fine needle in there, the hook would maybe be too far away from it. And so with the flat side being consistent, it's only going to grow on that side. So that's why when I was saying here on the accurate seam square, when you put it in and you push it over to the left side, it's going, push it over against the needle. That's the consistent side of the needle. And so it will be the same no matter if you were setting a seam, with either any size needle, the seam would remain the same.
Okay, next question. What causes a foot controller to get really hot? Is this something she can fix? Is there a video? Which there is, but...
Okay, what causes a foot controller to get hot? I definitely recommend our tutorial that we have on the site, but a quick way to say why it does is the way the foot controller works, it draws all the power all the time and resists the unused power. So if you're going really slow, there's unused power, but the foot controller is still drawing it. There's unused power in your foot controller, and that is what goes into the form of heat. So if you're sewing really slow, your foot controller is going to continue to get warm and more warm and more warm. So if you're continuing to go slow for a long time, it's good to take a break and let that controller cool down. If the foot controller gets hot when you're not using it, or if you're sewing and then you take a little break and you're sewing a little more and it's getting hot, it's likely that the foot controller is drawing power when you're not using it. That is what we call the foot controller out of adjustment. If that happens, the video is going to show you how to take apart the controller, check the adjustment, and make that adjustment so that it doesn't get hot.
Yeah, but hot is a real concern with all old resistor type style foot controllers on all old sewing machines, not just Singers, not just Featherweights. And so we always recommend that you put your machine on like a power strip, surge protector, whatever, that you can turn it off and make sure that you're cutting the power to the machine completely, and not just, well, I'm not there, I'm assuming it's not drawing power. You want to make sure, if the cat came along and laid on the controller or flipped it over or something like that and started drawing a little power, it could get very, very hot, and then that would be a fire danger.
Okay, so just a couple more questions because we've already been for an hour.
We've already
Okay,
been
a couple more questions.
I've read that cords and foot pedals should not be interchanged between machines, as this can cause the machines to start up on their own, if not unplugged when not in use.
Mhm.
Do the same hazards exist if a brand new cord or foot pedal is introduced to a machine?
The question is, can cords and foot controllers be changed out between machines? The answer is yes. As long as the wiring has not been changed. Or swapped, switched around behind the terminal. If the wiring has been switched behind the terminal, you can switch the wiring in the foot controller and make it match. But if you put an original or a new foot controller with the original wiring settings, you put it in there, then things are gonna be messed up. The light's gonna dim when you press the controller, or the light's always gonna be on. Various things.
But that's addressed in that foot controller tutorial.
That one would be addressed in there as well. So it is okay to change between new cords, old cords, and cords between
controller and new and vintage original. Yeah, you can change around as much as you want. The wrist never goes away as far as the machine. There is not a power switch on this machine.
Okay.
That switch down there on the front, that's only turning off and on your light. Anytime it's plugged in, it's got power to it, and you need to treat it that way.
And the good question is, what does low shank mean?
What does low shank mean?
Or short shank is sometimes it's
or
called
short
that too.
shank.
Right. So this featherweight is a low shank machine. So all low shank attachments should work on a featherweight. Now, there are certain attachments like the walking foot and stuff that it's low shank, but yet you still have to have the feet on the walking foot match the feed dogs on your machine. So yes, it would fit on here and you could get the needle to go up and down, but it wouldn't be working appropriately. But as a general rule, if it's low shank, they're going to be interchangeable. And so what we're talking about here, when this hooks onto the machine here, this shank right here, this is what they would call a low shank. A lot of industrials are a high shank, and so you'll see that this clamp part sits clear up here. And
Still fairly straight up and down as far as the bar, but
yeah,
the shank on the foot is higher.
Yeah, and then if you look at like your 301, for example, 301 is a slant shank. And so even though the slant shank, even though the bobbin case and such works interchangeably between a 301 and a 221, it has the same hook assembly, but you'll notice that both the needle bar and the presser bar are at an angle. And so that is called a slant shank. And so the feet, therefore, are not interchangeable.
And you did answer leaving the needle up or down
Yes.
already? Okay.
I think, yeah.
Okay. Should I leave the needle up or down is the question.
Oh, the needle?
When not in use.
The needle up or down?
I would take the needle out.
Yeah, or it doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean,
Just,
you know.
I leave my
yes.
needle in when I'm not using it.
Yeah.
Right. If you were transporting it and you were worried about something catching on it, yeah, Christian's right. I would take it out or something. But there's not any rule as how it's supposed to be kept, because the needle's technically not touching anything.
Okay.
Hopefully not.
This
Hopefully not.
there's not very many more questions, so we're
Okay.
good. I think my belt is loose. I get a screech often when I start to sew. Can that be tightened or should it be replaced? And does it hurt the machine to continue?
Nothing's hurting.
She gets a screech from her
squealing
belt when she starts.
Yeah, often, same thing happens with your car, your fan belt or whatever. If it's too loose or whatever, the pulley starts spinning and wearing on there, or if it has any sort of lubricant or something on there, it can do the same thing. So yeah, I would just watch that belt adjustment tutorial.
Yep.
It's not going to hurt anything. I mean, the squealing isn't causing any damage, but it probably would be annoying. So
Yeah.
Which
Check the adjustment.
Which plays into the next question was,
Next question.
sometimes my machine doesn't start stitching right away and I have to move the hand wheel.
Right.
Okay, the machine doesn't start stitching right away, and she has to move the hand wheel. It depends on a couple things. Usually what you can do is you can diagnose by seeing if the motor's running. If you press on the controller and you hear the motor running but nothing's happening, then it is almost always a belt adjustment, or the machine itself is too stiff, might need oil, or something might need to be replaced. If you don't hear the motor running at all, then either connection's not being made somewhere, or there is a dead cell on the armature, in which case the motor, to fix that, the motor would need to be rewound.
Yeah, and so what Christian's talking about, all these little copper tabs right here, they're cells on the commutator, and all those little thin wires, one of those wires will connect to that, and it makes this whole system of how it works. And if one of those little cells, if one of those wires breaks in there, and then the motor brush is coming down and it's not touching there, it's not going to make any, there's no continuity of electricity. So you turn the hand wheel, it moves this just a little bit, and that brush hits a new cell that is live, and your motor takes off. So a couple of things. If you tap on your foot controller, and randomly every fifth time or something, it just doesn't start up, you could be randomly landing on that dead cell. If it happens almost every time, then you may have carbon buildup in this port where the motor brush goes, and so it's not pressing down against there. And what's happening is, because remember I said that these actually weren't very round and balanced from Singer, you turn the hand wheel and this turns, and one of these cells, as it's going, if it's kind of oblong and it's going like this, one of those cells will come up and touch that brush and it'll take off again. So if it's happening every time, you probably need to get this cleaned out. If it just happens randomly, there's a good chance it's a dead cell, and if you can live with it, if it's random enough that you can live with it, then it's not really hurting anything. Just live with it. But if you get one or more than one of those little wires broke, then yeah, it's time to have the motor rewound. Okay, so we have been going for an hour and 10 minutes. Been flying by. It's been fun. Great audience. Nobody's thrown any eggs at me or anything. So
the questions were great.
The questions were great. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully it gave you something fun and interesting to do in your day, especially if you're like us and you're stuck at home.
So we're gonna go with Rick Rack now.
Yes.
Time to go pack packages.
We've got about 3 hours before the mail needs to be gone from here. So if you've got any orders placed, we're going to go work on them now. Be looking for that Rick Rack and my signature on there. I'll do my best, I promise. Anyway, you guys have been a really fun audience today, and appreciate the questions. And we'll do it again sometime.
Sounds great.
Next Thursday?
Next Thursday, possibly. Yeah. So, and well, and hopefully, I really want to get Burl back here, because Burl knows so much more technical. So it'd be nice to have Burl and Christian here answering things from both sides, and maybe Christian could even bring in a. Hey, you forgot about the calendar. Let's address that really quick. You want to go grab that?
I don't remember where I put it.
So I'm going to do a little filler here while Christian is going and grabbing something, because he had April, you want to come have a seat? Oh, my wife's going to join me.
I don't see, wait, there's a delay, so I don't know how I look here.
Oh, you look great, honey. Yes, but Christian.
I can't monitor questions though.
Okay.
Oh, he's back.
Okay.
All right.
Here, I'll let Christian take my spot. You two can stay there.
Okay.
So I was looking through
this calendar.
I was looking through our files, looking for something to give you guys during the quarantine. So I think it's tomorrow. But I found this calendar. It's a folding or rotating one, whatever you call. What is that called?
Probably would have been tied up at the top, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was. If I remember right.
Bound somehow.
Yeah, it's like it had. I don't know if it was like a tape. It was cord. It was a cord, like a little gold cord.
Okay.
Initially, but
there's 3 months on each page.
Turn that to the camera.
There's 3 months on each page. So they've a decorative print. Paul, what's his name?
Oh, I'm gonna give away a secret. Carmen, one of our favorite artists, his name is Paul DeLongpre. So now you can go Google his name. You'll recognize some of his prints. They are florals, and they have lots of bumblebees.
Yep, there's the bees.
Yep.
Yeah, and so this one is it's a Singer calendar.
Yeah, so this was from Singer.
Yep.
Singer put this out. Paul did the graphic, the artwork in the late 1800s. Anyways, 1896. This was the only one I had. I looked at it. I'm like, hey, 1896 was a leap year. March 1st was on a Sunday. This is the exact same as 2020. So we're including a download of this in the newsletter tomorrow, and you can print it out.
Yeah.
It'll be for subscribers, so make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter.
Yes, have to be
there'll
subscribed to the newsletter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now,
So you could print them off on cardstock or whatever, and you would have a really cool. I mean, good grief! It's from 1896. That is really old. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
I made sure in the files that the size was 8.5 by 11, so they should be easy to print.
okay, now because of this, I do need to give one shout out. We started this business in 2005, and I became friends with a gal online who was specializing in attachments. Her name was Julia, and some of you who've been with us all this time, you probably remember. Well, she's the one that introduced me to this artist. So Julia, if you are watching, I have been steadily collecting and looking at different Paul DeLongpre prints, and so when Christian pulled this out, I was pretty excited.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where that came from.
Okay, very good. Well,
Thank you.
thank you all, and we'll see you again.
Okay, bye.